everybody. My name is Varun Sandalraj, and I'm one of the instructors for this Python crash course, in which we're trying to teach you guys how to develop a programming mindset and understand the syntax and how to write proper programming using Python. Um, so most of you guys are here today, and that's kind of important because we want to give some crucial updates to our organization that's going on right now. So currently, our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript course, in which we teach you guys how to make really cool, beautiful, interactive websites, is actually pushed back for another week. So it'll be starting next week. So you guys have a little bit more time to sign up. We've got some spots already taken up. We only have a few spots left. If you guys are interested, don't feel free to just message us on Discord or email or group me, and we can reserve you a spot before we release the sign up link to the public. Second update is that we have actually we're planning on creating a C++ course in which we kind of teach more advanced programmers how C++ works, the syntax behind C++, and how to, just teaching the basics of it. If you guys are interested, once you finish this Python course, it'll probably start up in another like 3 weeks. You guys can attend that course, and it'll be like a good supplemental programming language to learn, and which will help you when it comes to learning other languages like Java, and it'll actually help you out in your career as well. That's really all the updates we have about our organization, but now we're going to move on to our weekly programmer tip. So this week we wanted to, our tip for this week is code by hand. It sharpens the proficiency. Whenever you're coding, especially if you're encountering a problem in which you don't know how to solve, you should never try to code it. You should never think about it in code and just stare at a computer screen, trying to solve it. That's not really going to help. Usually what programmers do is they have like a specific notebook where they write down where they usually write down all the problems related to programming and how to solve it. For example, I have one notebook in which I mainly keep for programming, and all I do is I use that to problem solve programming problems, and even just write down some code sometimes to help understand the syntax behind programming. That way, writing it is probably a little bit better when instead of just typing it out on a computer, because that way it stays in your head. Whenever you write it down, it usually it stays in your head for a longer time. So that's the tip that we have for this week. Now let's actually move on to our content for this week. So this week we're going to be going over loops, while loops, and we'll also be going over what functions are. So as you guys know, there's something called a for loop. And the for loop usually takes a collection of items and it executes a block of code once for each item in the collection. In contrast, a while loop runs as long as as long as a certain condition is true. So let me actually show you guys how a while loop works. So as you guys see here, we're creating a while loop in which we want to count up through a series of numbers, for example, from 1 to 5. So we create, so in the first line, as you guys can see, we start by counting from 1, by assigning the current number, the value number 1, to keep running as long as the value is greater than or less than or equal to 5. So the while loop will continue to run over and over again as long as the current number is less than or equal to 5. Because inside of the while loop, we're adding 1 to the current number over and over again. So this code will continue to run over and over again as long as the current number variable is less than or equal to 5. That's why, as you guys see here, if we were to run this cell, it starts at 1 and it continues to run all the way till we reach 5. So as we said earlier, a while loop works by running the program inside of the while loop over and over again, as long as the condition that's related to the while loop is true. So for example, going back to our example here, we start off with 1. When it's 1, it's less than 5, so it continues on and adds another 1, adds 1 to the current number. Then as the current number is 2, so 2 is less than 5, so that means it will continue to run the program over again. So it'll add 1 again. It'll keep doing that until it's equal to 5 is less than or equal to 5, because 5 is equal to 5. That's why it stops the while loop at that time, and then it moves on to the next part of the program, which there is no next part, so it just stops the program there. So the programs you use every day most likely contain a while loop. Like for example, say you have a game where it needs a while loop to continue running as long as you want to keep playing. So it'll only stop when the game is over. So while loops are very important when it comes to programming. So we'll be going over more examples of how while loops can be used and different applications. So for example, here, what we're about to dive into is we're going to create a parrot program in which it will just repeat whatever you say, or whatever you type, it will just repeat that over and over again, as long as you type in quit. If you type in quit, it should stop the program altogether. So in this example, we're going to show you how you can use an if statement inside of a while loop, similar to how you can use a if statement inside of a for loop. So while and for loops are very similar to each other. So now let me dive into our program. So as you guys see here, we have a variable called prompt. So all we're doing is when we run this, so if we were to run this program, it prints out the statement, tell me something, I will repeat it back to you. So that's the initial statement in which we are printing. And all we're telling in this program is to, as long as the message is not equal to quit, so that means as long as the condition message is not equal to quit is true, this code under here will continue to run. So now, so for example, if I were to type in any word, so let's say I say hello, it'll just repeat hello. It'll keep going over and over again. As I say hi, it'll continue. But if I were to type in quit, the program ends right there, because we set it so that if the message is not equal to quit, it'll print the message. Otherwise, it will continue to run over and over again. Oh, so when we say prompt is plus equal to over here, all that is saying, so all we're doing is adding two strings together. So let me open up a new cell to explain this. So say the way Python works is with the plus sign, you can add two items together. If you add two numbers together, you'll get a numerical value afterward. But if you were to add two strings together, say hello, if we were to add my name is Varun, all we're doing is adding these two strings together. So as you guys see here, it says tell me something, I'll repeat it back to you. That's the first prompt. And the second part we're doing is we're adding so all we're doing is adding this phrase to the prompt above it. Enter quit to end the program. That's all it's doing. So if I were to run this, as you guys see here, the two phrases are actually connected together. So the plus sign, when there's two strings and you add a plus sign there, all it's doing is adding the two strings together. Does that answer your question, or do you need any more clarification on that? Okay. So now let's actually like make the program a little bit more advanced. So in the previous example, we had the program perform a certain task while a given condition is true. But for more complicated programs, you want different events to occur until it stops running. So for a program, it should only run as long as many conditions are true. So you can define a variable that determines whether or not the entire program is active. The variable called flag acts as a signal. I'm going to show you guys here. So here we have a variable called active. The active variable acts as kind of like a flag to determine if the program should continue running over and over again. So when we're saying while active, well, all it's saying is while active is equal to true. The pirate program will run over and over again. But if the user were to type in quit, the program would, the active variable would turn false, and that would cause the while loop's condition to become false as well. Then that would cause the while loop to terminate and end right there. So if we were to run this, should be double equal to. So if we were to type anything, it would continue to run. But when we type in quit, the active variable, which programs usually refer to as a flag, if we type in quit, it would cause the condition to become false and program to end right there. So that's really how Boolean expressions or variables can be used in conjunction with a while loop. So now, to exit a while loop immediately without running any remaining code inside of a loop, regardless of the results of any conditional test, you can use a break statement. A break statement directs the flow of the program. You can use it to control which lines of the code are executed and which lines aren't executed. So the program only executes the code that you want it to when you want it to. So for example, let's create a program that asks the user about the places they've visited. And we can stop the while loop in the program by calling break as soon as the user enters the quit value. So as you guys see here, we have a very similar program to the parrot program. All we're doing is asking the user, what cities have you visited? The user should print out the cities that they visited, and it would print out in a statement, I love to go to that city. But as you guys see here, we're using that break function, which we talked about earlier. So all that break function is doing here is if the city is, if the user were to type in quit, the while loop should terminate. So the break statement, all it does is terminate the while loop or any for loop or any loop in general. So if we were to run this, say I visited Atlanta. It says, I love to go to Atlanta. Very similar to that, you can type in any city that you want and it'll continue. But if we were to type in quit, it would terminate because we use the break function, which will terminate the entire while loop. So a break statement, all it does is exit a loop. You can include it anywhere, and usually you use it in conjunction with a if statement. So if the statement is false, or if the statement is true, it will break the, it will end the while loop or any loop in general. So sometimes instead of breaking out of a loop entirely without executing the rest of the code, you can use a continue statement to return to the beginning of the loop based on the result of a conditional test. For example, consider a loop that counts from 1 to 10, but prints only the odd numbers inside that range. So, like we talked about, it will keep running and it will only print out the odd numbers in that range. And so we're using the continue statement here to so if the number is if the number is an even number, it will just continue back up to the while loop and continue over and over again. Because all we're doing here is we're adding 1 to current number and determining if that number is an even or odd number because of the modulo operator. Remember, we went over this in a previous lesson, but the modulo operator, all it does is it prints out the remainder of a division problem. So as you guys see here, it prints out all of the odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 9, because 1 divided by 2, the remainder is 1. So that's even that's an odd number. So it'll continue over and over again. But for example, if we take 2, 2 divided by 2, the remainder is 0. So we don't want the print statement to occur. So that's why we use the continue function to return all the way back up to the beginning of the while loop and continue running over and over again. So that's pretty much all we have for the while loop lesson. This lesson is a little bit short, but we might have gone over it a little bit quickly. So what I recommend is to actually do the homework for this lesson. So the homework for this lesson is actually go back over this Jupyter notebook. And remember, all we're doing in the video lessons is teaching you guys the concepts and letting you understand the concepts. You guys can understand the code as well, but you won't properly learn the programming unless you actually apply it yourself. So what I recommend is going back over the Jupyter notebook and doing some of the practice assignments. As you guys see here, we have some practice assignments in which you guys can practice all the topics we've gone over for while loops. So just remember that programming, you have to apply it to actually learn it. So that's why we're giving you all of these resources to use to actually learn the code. All we're doing in the videos is just explaining the concept and helping you guys understand that yourselves. So that's all of the homework for that lesson. We're going to go ahead and take a break now. If you guys have any questions about past assignments, about other courses, or about what we just went over today, put it in the chat and we will answer it during this break. So one person asked when we will send the Jupyter Notebook links. The links will usually be sent out either today or tomorrow for every lesson. I think we already sent out all the past homework assignments. But we'll actually, so we'll create a Google Drive and send out, if you guys don't have access to the previous Jupyter Notebooks, we'll create a Google Drive folder and send that out to all of you guys with all of the Jupyter Notebooks organized, so you guys can go back and look at it anytime. But for this lesson, the Jupyter Notebooks will be coming out on Saturday or Sunday.
Varun, we got one more question.
Yeah, I just saw that. So one person asked, could you please explain when we're supposed to use the braces, square brackets, and parentheses? Okay. So let me open up a new file to explain this. So braces are usually used for dictionaries. So if you ever want to create a dictionary, what you have to do is you have to use braces, and you can put in the key value pairs inside of those braces. For example, name. Oh, I forgot to put name. That's usually so. Braces are used for dictionaries. Okay. Um. Oh. Um. Square brackets are mainly used for lists. So, for example, if we want to create a list of numbers from 1 to 10, 1, wait, list. So if you want to create a list from of numbers 1 to 10, you just type, you have to use square brackets and put your values inside of that list. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. And then finally, parentheses are mainly used. So parentheses are used mainly for tuples, but we'll be going over how parentheses are used in functions as well in this next lesson. But for now, just understand that if you want to create a tuple, if you guys don't remember, a tuple is very similar to a list, but you can't really change, you don't have functions or methods to change the values inside of the tuple. So usually tuples, the values inside of tuples are usually never changed throughout a program. But if you want to create a tuple of, let's say, all of the odd numbers, you use parentheses and type in all your values like that. So that's the difference between braces, square brackets, and parentheses. Okay, welcome back. We're going to go ahead and finish up the second part of our lesson in which we're going to talk about functions. So in this lesson, we'll teach you guys how to write functions, which are named blocks of code that are designed to do one specific job. When you want to perform a particular task that you've defined inside of a function, you call the function responsible for it. You'll find that using function makes your program easy to write, read, test, and fix. So let's actually hop over to the Jupyter notebook to see how to write a simple function. So this shows you how to write a very simple function. We start off by using the keyword def, as you guys see here, to define a function. When you define a function, you tell Python the name of the function and the necessary parameters to run the function. Parameters are held inside of the parentheses, as you guys see here. Since this function you guys are seeing right now does not need any parameters to run, we do not need to include any. And to end defining a function, all we have to do is include a colon right here. So after defining that function, any indented lines inside of the function make up usually the body of the function. So as you guys see here, we have a statement that says it prints hello. So that's like the only line of code we actually have for this function. So this is actually the body of the function. So this function's main job, all it's supposed to do is print out or greet the user by printing hello. So if you guys want to think about it easier, think about a function as a block. The block contains some code inside of it. That code inside of that block won't run until you call that function. So as you guys see here, we have a function. We define the function and we put the code inside of the function that needs to run. If we run it, nothing happens. The code doesn't run. But when we call the function later on, as you guys see here, the way to call a function is by just printing out the name of the function with the parentheses and putting your parameters inside of the parentheses. We do not have any parameters for this program, but so we don't need to include any. But it only runs when you call the function. So it prints out hello. So that's how a simple function works. If you guys have any questions, put it in the chat and we'll answer it like regarding how a function works. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on. So we can actually modify our previous function, greet user, to not only tell the user hello, but also to greet them by their name. For the function to do this, you can enter a username inside of the parentheses of the function by defining it in the parentheses by defining it in the parentheses area. So as you guys see here, we just took the same function, and all we're doing is we're passing a parameter of the username inside of the parentheses. Then we're using that parameter and printing out the name of the user as well inside of the function. So as you guys see here, we just define the function and we put the parameters inside the parentheses. And say we have a user named Danny. If we reprint this, it's printing out the parameter, which is Danny, inside of the print statement. So saying hello, Danny in title case. So think about it like this. Inside of a function, you can define a variable inside of the function parameters to actually hold a value. And that value can be used anytime inside of that function for whatever that's needed for. So we can change the username to anything. If we change the username to Rick, the code will print out hello Rick. So the parameter can be anything, but usually just define it inside of the parentheses whenever you need it. So in the function that we talked about before, the greet user function, we defined greet user to require a value of the variable username. But once we call the function and gave it the information, which was the person's name or the username, it printed out the right greeting. The variable username is an example of a parameter, which is a piece of information the function needs to do its job. So the value Danny that we talked about earlier, oh, now it's Rick, but it's an example of an argument. An argument is a piece of information that's passed from a function to call a function. So when we call the function, we place the value inside the parentheses, and in this case, it was Rick, and we passed the function greet user, and the value is assigned to the variable username and used inside of the function to print out hello Rick. So really quickly, let's just go over the difference between argument and parameters. The parameter is the variable in which you put it inside the parentheses. Argument is the value which you assign to, when you call the function, it's the value you put inside the calling the function, which is assigned to the variable which is used inside of the function. So that's the difference between arguments and parameters. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? Okay, so because a function definition can have multiple parameters, a function may need multiple arguments. So you can pass arguments to your function in a number of ways. You can use something called positional arguments, which need to be in the same order of the parameters that were written. The keyword, so arguments have to be in the correct order as the order of the parameters. So let's actually look at how positional arguments work. So as you guys see here, we have a simple function that will describe the animal, describe the pet in which you put down here. So all we're doing is we're passing two parameters, animal type and pet name. And all we're doing is we're using those parameters inside the program to print out, I have an animal, whatever the animal is, and my animal type, or whatever animal type you typed in, is this pet. So what you guys have to understand is the parameters are in a specific order. The animal type goes first, then the pet name goes second. So when we were to call this function, when we were calling the arguments in the parentheses, hamster correlates to animal type, and Harry correlates to pet name. So the position actually matters. If we were to mix this up, if we were to put Harry here, well, actually, before I do that, let me show you how this program runs. It says, I have a hamster. My hamster's name is Harry. It works exactly as intended. It prints out the animal type here and animal type here. If we were to switch this around with Harry here and hamster here, it'll print out, I have a Harry. My Harry's name is hamster. So it mixes up those two. So all the positional argument is that the order matters for the parameters as well as for the arguments. So, but as we have told you earlier, functions actually make writing programs a lot easier. You may ask, how is that true? Why do I need to create a block of code which should be called in my program at any time? Why can't I just manually write it? The reason why is because you can call a function multiple times inside of a program. So for example, say you had a piece of code that was repeated over and over and over again inside of your program. For example, say it was supposed to print out, say you were creating an alien game and it prints out the alien score over and over and over again. You can easily simplify it by just creating a function which prints out the alien score over and over again. So as you guys see here, we just take the same program in which we're describing the pet. We can call it once here and it'll print out, I have a hamster, my hamster's name is Harry. But we can call it one more time with different values and it'll still work the same. So that's what differentiates just writing it out normally and creating a function to actually write it. So functions are very important and it can actually make writing programs a lot easier than intended. So does anyone have any questions before we go over specifically different applications and different ways to write arguments? Okay, so a keyword argument is a name-value pair that you pass to a function. You can directly associate the name and the value within the argument. So when you pass the argument to the function, there is no confusion of whether which argument correlates with which parameter. So so pretty much keyword argument, just make sure that you don't have to worry about that at all, and you can just clarify the role inside of the argument. And let me show you guys how that's actually done. As you guys see here, we're just taking the same function as describe pet, and we want to print out. You want to use the animal type hamster and Harry. But the thing with keyword argument is we're directly associating the parameter with hamster and pet name with Harry. So we can even mix this up and move this around. So say we put Harry here. And if we were to move animal type here and we put pet type there, or pet name here, it will still print out the same statement. when you're just directly associating the parameter with the argument. This way you just don't have to worry about if order matters or not, but it's just another way of actually using arguments and making it easier for people to write arguments. So sometimes you may want to set a default value that's inside of your function. So this is very crucial. So for example, we're creating a direct default value of the animal type being a dog. So maybe this described pet program is only for dogs. So we just set the animal type as dogs permanently. So we don't have to worry about the user passing the argument dog every single time. It will automatically associate the parameter as dog. So as you guys see here, we're doing the same program, but the default value of animal type is dog. And if we were to run this, it'll print out, I have a dog, my dog's name is Willie. So you can set a default value inside of a function to make it easier to run. But if you wanted to change that default value at any time, all you have to do is directly associate the animal type, which is dog, and you just change the value inside of it. So all we're doing is like redefining the variable, as you guys could say it. So if we were to run this, it changes the default value of dog directly to hamster and saying, I have a hamster, my hamster's name is Harry. So we're explicitly changing or directly changing the value of dog to hamster. So a function doesn't always have to display its output directly. Instead, it can process some data and then return a value or a set of values. The value the function returns is called a return value. The return statement takes a value from inside of the function, sends it back to the line that calls the function, and sends it back to the line which calls the function. So return values actually allow you to move much of your program's hard work or into the function, which can simplify the body of your program. So let's actually look at an example of how this is done. So here we are creating a program to format a person's name. The parameters are the person's first name and the person's last name. And all we're doing is formatting it and returning the value of their full name. So if we were to run this, it'll print out their full name in an organized form. So all you guys have to understand is that the return function, it will return the value that you want it to return at the end of the function, as well as terminate the function altogether. It will stop the function there itself. If you had extra lines afterward, it would not run it. See, nothing happens. It doesn't even go to this print statement. So you can use return functions in two different ways: to return a specific value at the end of a function, or just to terminate a function altogether. So sometimes, so let's actually go over to like two different cool things. Sometimes you can make arguments optional, and you can assign, you can have arbitrary number of arguments inside of your program. So let's actually look at an example of how to make an argument optional. So when we're looking at this cell right here, the name is built off of three possible parts: the first name, the last name, and the middle name. But the reason why we put middle name at the end is because the first name and last name are necessary. It's not optional, but the middle name is actually optional. So all we're doing to make the argument optional is we're using if and else statement. And we're just saying if the middle name, so first off, we're setting a default value of middle name being none, because some people don't have middle names, right? So we go ahead and set that as a default value. But we're saying if the middle name is true, if they actually have a middle name, then we want to include middle name inside of the full name. Otherwise, if the middle name is false, which means they don't have a middle name, we don't even include it altogether. And we just return the full name at the very end. So over here, we have two different names, one person with a middle name, one without a middle name. And if we were to run this, oh, I forgot to run this. So if we were to run this, it works both ways. When we don't include a middle name, it goes to this if statement and prints out the name. No, it goes past this if statement and prints out the name without a middle name. Otherwise, if there is a middle name, it will print out the middle name itself inside of the full name. So that's how you can make arguments optional inside of a program. Just because sometimes you may not know, for example, in this program, you may not know if the person has a middle name. But say you want to have a arbitrary number of arguments. You don't know how many arguments are actually going to be passed in. How would we do that? Python allows a function to actually collect an arbitrary amount of arguments from calling it inside the statement. For example, let's actually consider a function that actually builds a pizza. But it needs to accept an arbitrary number of toppings. You don't know how many toppings a user would actually input inside of making the pizza program. So the way we're doing this is we have to include this hash or like a star here. This all it is saying that there's going to be an infinite amount. We don't know how many are there, and it will pass every single argument through. And if we were to run this by printing out all the toppings, it will print out all the toppings. But the problem is when we're passing an infinite amount of toppings, it will store it inside of a tuple. So if you want to extract the values out of the tuple, we're just using a for loop to loop through all the toppings inside of the parameter toppings, which we're inputting inside of the function. It will print out every single value. So as you guys see here, instead of being inside of a tuple, it will print out pepperoni separately, and it'll print out mushrooms, green peppers, and extra cheese. So this could be useful, for example, like this program in which you don't know how many toppings a person would put on a pizza. So that's pretty much all we have for this lesson. We've gone over while loops and functions. So pretty much after this lesson would be all you need to know for the basics of Python. But we're going to have one more lesson in which we're going to be going over something called object-oriented programming. And we're just giving like a brief overview of it because it is kind of complex. And that's how companies usually code their applications. Our object-oriented programming is just a way to make your code more organized and make it easier and more navigatable for your friends or colleagues to look through your code. So we'll be going over that next lesson. It will also be going over what to do afterward, about or what you should do to continue programming, getting better at programming. And we'll just give you guys more tips. You guys can ask us any questions, and that's what we'll be mainly doing next lesson. But if you guys want to go ahead and stop here, go ahead, because we've gone over the basics. Next lesson is going to be a little bit more advanced, but we would highly recommend going to that lesson because this type of stuff people usually do inside of large companies when they're working together in a large group. And you'd be actually going over how to organize the code and write code like an employee would for a company. But otherwise, for this homework, for this lesson, we'll be going over functions and go over the functions Jupyter Notebook that we have here. It'll be, remember, we're just going over the concepts inside of the video lessons, but it's kind of your job to actually understand the code yourself and actually apply the code. Because we have practice assignments every once in a while inside here, in which you can practice directly in the Jupyter Notebook or into in REPL.it. Secondly, if you guys don't remember, HackerRank is a way to actually showcase your skills to the world outside. And we wanted you guys to do 2 different tasks on hackerrank.com. We want you guys to do write a function task and print a function task. One of them may be a little bit harder, as you guys see here that the difficulty is actually medium, but don't be afraid. Make sure that you actually read the instructions, write out the code, don't type it out, to actually process on how to solve the program, then solve it, because it's not that hard. As long as you can think through it, you'll be able to solve it just fine. But if you guys need any help on this assignment, go ahead and message us. It will be slightly hard, but if you actually think about the problem, you'll be able to solve it in the end. And just solve the print function as well, but this one's a little bit easier than the other one. But that's all we have for today. We'll be sending out the Jupyter notebooks sometime today or tomorrow, and we'll be sending out the edited video sometime at the end of this week. So that's all we have for today. If you have any questions, go ahead and put in the chat. Otherwise, we'll end it here.
Thank you for coming, everyone.